Welcome to Driven Ops Power Talk. I'm Jazmine Moore.
And I'm Rebecca Heyse. We're two work besties who have spent over a decade learning the ins and outs of sales and marketing.
On this podcast, we discuss all things go-to-market operations, the people, processes, and technologies that make up the engine of a thriving go-to-market function. Let's get to it. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Driven Ops Power Talk, where we dive deep and talk everything revenue operations. I'm Jazmine Moore, and I am joined today by my astute and insightful co-host, Becca Heyse. Becca, how's it going?
It's going really good, and I'm super excited for our first episode. And for those of the people out there, our new audience, Jazz and I have been work besties for a while, and whenever we get together, we just always talk about marketing and sales ops and the different things we're working on or different tools we're using. And we figured there must be an audience that also wants to talk about things like this.
Exactly. We're part of that small community that have work besties that continue being your friends after you leave the company. So we haven't worked together in a while, but we still get together and talk shop weekly.
Yeah, definitely.
So now we're just going to record it.
Yep, exactly. And
because we dropped out of Toastmasters.
Yeah. And hopefully people enjoy it and are like us and just like to talk about it. And so I have to tell you, I was working on something where this made me just think this might be an interesting thing to discuss. But we had a project, and it was one of those projects where you just don't do it very often. And I was lost. I didn't know. I couldn't remember. I was just digging through emails trying to figure out what we did. And that made me think, wow, I need to make sure I document this going forward, because the next time we run through this, I do not want to forget and have to be digging through stuff to remember.
That brings me to the topic of today's episode. It's something that always seems to fall by the wayside, but it's very, very important. Mm-hmm. Today, Becca and I are going to give you our top 5 best practices of documentation. Mm-hmm. Let's dig in.
Yes, let's get it going.
I'll kick us off with my first best practice. It's centralization. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by this is make sure that your documentation is the same documentation that the entire team references. There should be one single source of truth. Mm-hmm. In my experience, I've worked with teams where everyone has their own documentation in their own location, and that ends up being very ineffective. Mm-hmm. If you're using V1, I'm using V5, it just doesn't make sense. It really defeats the purpose of why we're using the documentation in the first place. Mm-hmm, so having your documentation in the centralized location makes it so that it encourages collaboration. Mm-hmm. It streamlines the communication, and it also mitigates the risk of using outdated documentation.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And that brings us to number 2, which is making sure you consistently update. So to your point, it's great to have documentation, and you definitely need it to be in a centralized place, but then you also need to make sure it's the most recent version of what you're using. I can't tell you how many times I have gone through looking for a process or something a team is doing so that I can move forward with that team and do what they need, but then it's 3-4 years old. And so you have to definitely make sure that you are consistently prioritizing updating your documentation, making sure that if anything has changed, if anything new has come into place, like new technology, anything, any new team members that have changed something on their side of things, you have to always make sure it's consistently updated.
That happens all the time too. There's always a new tool.
Yep.
So there's always a new player that comes into the mix. Like some processes are ever evolving and changing. And so that documentation needs to move along with it.
Yes, definitely.
It has to be a priority. Mm-hmm. That brings me to our third best practice, which is prioritize and enforce. Mm-hmm. So we all know it's important. It's, like I said, it's always something that seems to get pushed to the end of your list because there always seems to be something that's more important at the time, or more urgent, or more impactful.
Yep, definitely.
Well, I disagree with the impactful piece because, I mean, just think about it. The worst thing that you can do is have a well-oiled marketing machine and then have someone leave the company who was an important cog in the machine, and then the rest of the team is scrambling.
Yep.
trying to train the new person that replaces them
Yeah.
without documentation.
Exactly. It's always just knowledge. It's just that person's knowledge that you have to try to gain, but
Oh,
it doesn't help.
tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
That used to be like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
You'd go to someone and you'd ask, well, how do you know how to do this? How do you know where this goes?
Yeah.
And they'd be like, well, tribal knowledge. I've been here for 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's such a red flag, like
Yeah.
red flag, red flag.
Yes.
If someone says tribal knowledge, that's a telltale that
There's
pretty
no documentation.
yeah,
probably.
that's a sure sign that they need to document
Yeah, exactly.
their tribal knowledge.
Mhm.
Because if you win the lottery today, I'm pretty sure you're not going to prioritize writing down your documentation.
Nope,
for
you're
me.
gone.
So prioritize and enforce. And
Mhm.
of course, that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
I think that it should be something like a top-down directive. It should
Mhm.
be is a part of everyone's culture and
Yeah.
habits to document.
Definitely.
It's easy to start that way, to start off your team as documenters, then
Mhm.
try to implement the requirement later on.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there's a tip for you every time,
Yeah.
oh, there's a new workflow, let's document it.
Yeah.
You want me to show you this process? Sure, I'll send you a quick Loom and then I'll update the documentation.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to make that time, like you said, whether it's putting a calendar task for yourself every month, every however long you think you need to review it, just making sure that you consistently do that. And exactly, you have to make it a priority. It has to be a piece of your regular practice.
I like your point of updating it regularly
Mhm.
and using a calendar block. I was talking to another fellow RevOps professional, and they were telling me how every quarter they set reminders in their
Yeah.
project management
Mhm.
application
Yeah,
for
exactly.
themselves and the team to update their
Mhm.
documentation.
Yep.
Like, wow, that is a level of organization that I strive to be
Yeah,
at.
exactly. Me too. And on top of that, our number 4 best practice is making sure that you have the right permission set for your documentation. So, as we mentioned earlier, you want one source of truth. You don't want someone to come in and make a copy of your version, and now people don't know which version is the right version, or accidentally delete something or modify something that is not actually a part of the real process. So, you want to make sure that depending on what you're using, you are changing those permission sets and only giving the right collaborators access to changing that. And then again, making sure you have it in that centralized place so people know this should be the source of truth. This is the one that I need to use. And that is definitely something you don't want to mess up, because it's the worst thing having someone say, like you said, V1 versus V15,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, somebody made their own V15 also.
Yeah.
On top of it.
It's chaos.
Yeah, definitely chaos. So definitely make sure that you change permission sets.
Yeah. As much as some of us RevOps pros love organized chaos,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not. It's
Yeah.
not it. That is not it.
No.
Okay, our last tip or best practice is to QA and test.
Mm-hmm.
This is a part of our everyday, right? We're
Yeah.
building things, we're shipping things, we're always QAing what we're building.
Yeah.
We're building a Marketo program. We're going to build it, we're going to review it,
Yep.
and then we're going to QA it.
Exactly.
And then some of us even take it a step further and have their peer QA it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is top tier
Yeah.
QA, having
And-
your peer QA something.
And that's what we used to do when we worked together. Jazz would write documentation and then she would send it to me and say, can you run through this? And if I was stuck on something that maybe just threw me off where I wasn't sure, then she could modify and add that little extra, piece that just reinforces what to do. And it's definitely peer QA is a good
Exactly.
idea.
It's not just for program builds, it's for
Right.
your documentation as well. And
Definitely.
if you write some documentation and have your peer try to perform that process, and if they have a lot of questions,
Mhm.
they're confused, well, that tells you that you need to revisit the documentation
Yeah.
and make it a little bit more clear for the next person.
Exactly. And on top of that, when you're dealing with different teams, you run into different scenarios with that too. So if you're doing marketing processes, you might have that specific steps where you're having to build out, like you said, Marketo programs and different things. And then if you're dealing with individuals following a process, then you might need to say, okay, here's step 1, here's step 2. So you want to make
Yep.
sure that you are going through those steps yourself and not skipping anything that would confuse any other team that has to follow your documentation.
Totally. Okay, so those are our top 5 best practices, but it wouldn't be us if we didn't have just one honorable mention. So when we think of documentation, a lot of people think of documentation as a large book of
Mhm.
step 1, this is what you do, step
Yep.
2, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yep.
And it's good to switch up the format of your
Mhm.
documentation.
Yep. So that's our bonus is format, making sure that you have different formats depending on what you're working on.
You may have an SOP that's,
Mhm.
has all of your steps written out, but also recorded videos. I'm a fan
Mhm.
of Loom.
Yep, for sure.
Scribe is another tool that records all of your steps. Very cool
Mhm.
format. Or even checklists.
Yep.
That's a big one.
Yep, exactly. And making sure that you have what you need that's clear, but then exactly changing the format. Not everybody, again, has the same sort of process. So if you have to like fill out a form, you might have checklists, you might have drop downs, you might have things that people have to fill out that are specific to the need of what it is, but then you might be creating a different piece of documentation that is only step by step, follow these rules, this is what I need you to do, kind of thing. So you have to see what works for you, but make sure that it's clear and make sure that you have different templates, even if
Yep.
good templates for every time you have that specific process, so that you don't have to keep recreating it.
There's this makes me think there's layers to document, like
Oh,
there's levels to this.
completely.
So if you're a marketing operations manager and you're managing the shipping of a webinar program,
Mhm.
you have your checklist. What do we need for the
Yep,
webinar program? We need
exactly.
a Marketo program,
Mhm.
Salesforce campaign, we need emails, we need blogs, we need social
Right.
media posts. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Exactly. And then if you're working with a sales team and you have different tech stack that they use, there's different processes that they have to follow to make sure that you're capturing their activity, making
Yep.
sure that they're sending those webinar announcements
Yep.
out, making sure they're inviting people, but there's still a process to making sure that that happens, and there's formats to making sure that that happens correctly so you're capturing the right information.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Totally a good one. I just couldn't let that one go.
No.
We and 5 sounds a lot better than 6, so we had to
Yeah.
just add that one in as an
Bonus.
honorable mention.
Yeah. So if you're like us and you just like to chat over some coffee with your friends about random things that are happening, then this is the place to be, because we like to talk about that. And so today on Coffee Talk, we wanted to talk about random words that are said in the workplace that you would like to retire.
Corporate jargon that we need to leave in Q1.
Yeah, get rid of it. We're over it. It's oversaid, overdone. It can go away now. One word that consistently comes up that I hear, and I know you said you haven't heard about this one, but for me, I feel like I've heard it over and over, and I think I've even heard it on TV segments that I've seen, but it is bad actor.
Oh, yeah.
So this phrase is kind of used if somebody is doing something kind of shady. It's just, maybe somebody you thought was a good employee, and then next thing you found out they were doing some sly things on the side, and now they're booted from the company, but they call them bad actors. Like, you thought they were a good employee, but they were acting, right?
Oh, we call those weasels.
Yeah, exactly. Like, let's just call it what it is. They're a weasel. They're doing some shady stuff. Like, I don't know, but I feel like bad actor is definitely overplayed.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I have a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Let's stop using doing more with less.
Yes.
I think it really started to blow up in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was doing more with less,
Yep.
and yada yada. Okay,
Yeah.
it's 2024.
Yeah.
Let's leave that behind.
Yes.
Now we're just all doing our jobs.
Yes.
And maybe our jobs are harder. That's okay.
Yep.
But we've been doing more for a while. That this is the norm.
Yeah. Exactly.
We have set our new standards. More is not more.
Yeah.
It's just what we've been doing for 4 years. So
exactly.
let's leave that back in 2020 where it started.
I agree. Yep. Totally agree. And last one I'll leave with is, maybe everyone can relate to this, but double click, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, let me double click into that. Okay. Like, you can't physically double click into it. Let's just.
I'm so guilty of
Yeah.
using double click. Oh my goodness. That's like really prominent in my vocabulary, but only at work is the weird thing. I would never be sitting at the dinner table with my daughter and her tell me about her day, and I'd be like, wait, let's double click on your conversation that you had with your teacher. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah.
let's double click it. I would never do that.
No. I know. I think I used it once and then I go, oh no, it's gotten into my vocabulary. I don't want this. I don't want this. But yeah, I think that's another one that's kind of overused for sure.
She'd be using that at school. She
Yeah.
likes to, like a parrot, you know, she's
Yeah.
a sponge.
Yeah.
So
for
she'd just be
sure.
going to school and talking to her teacher. Like,
Yeah.
nope, I want to double click on that.
That's actually kind of cute.
I want to
though.
be the line leader.
A little CEO walking around. That'd be kind of cute to hear.
Her teacher would be like, you can't be the line leader today.
Yeah.
She'd be like, let's double click on that and figure out why you've
Oh, man.
come to that conclusion.
That's so funny.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. We discussed our 5 top best practices in documentation with a special honorable mention.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. We're excited to continue this journey together and with you all, diving through the depths of revenue operations.
Yeah, and we would also love to hear any of your worst terms that you'd like to get rid of. So definitely leave us some comments, and we hope you enjoyed our first episode.
Signing off.
Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on all social media platforms.
Keep up with us on all of our hot takes on all things go-to-market operations. See you next time.